Now, in Sutra 17 to 22, Patanjali describes the two aspects of Samadhi and the gradual progress we may attain. Now, so far we heard about yoga that involves restraining the fluctuations of the mind. If we succeed with that, our seer abides in his own original nature. However, that is not the case. Our mind tends to go all over the place according to the state of our vrittis. However, it can be centered and stabilized through practice and dispassion. Then Patanjali explained Sampragnata Samadhi, and he said Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Smita, Rupanugamat, Sampragnataha. That Sampragnata Samadhi means together with something, a wisdom that comes together with something else. And as you are able to inquire and understand your mind, the nature around you, the very prakriti, and becomes clearer of and moving from the gross to a more subtle understanding of things, there's a natural centering and a stabilizing factor that happens within the mind. So that's the first step of Sampragnata Samadhi is Vitarka. That means inquiry, a kind of focused awareness of things around you. That is the first step. And Vichara is a more subtle inquiry into thinking, doing the impulses that make us do what we do, the subtleties underneath the surface structure of things. So that is the second one. And then the third step of Sampragnata Samadhi is when there is a sense of joy, a sense of spontaneous joy arising from just being alive, feeling contact with life. So Vitarka, Vichara, Anand, Asmita. And the final one is Asmita, that I am. You come to realize that you are that seer. You are not the fluctuation and the various movements and patterns in the mind. You are something else. You are something stable and clear. And that is the source of who you are, according to Patanjali. In Sutra 17, we see here that the gradual progress of attaining Samadhi start with the gross, making sense of the world around you, inquiring into the subtle nature of things. Then a spontaneous joy may arise from just the joy of being alive. And then finally you may come to know that asmita, that inmost being, the purity of that seer is our source of existence. And then the second one, which is Asampragnata Samadhi, means asam, not in contact with something else. So there's a higher type of Samadhi when you're not affected by the mind. There's one without the second. There's that inmost purity of being centered in its own nature and not colored by what it sees, it interprets, and what it relates to. And not even colored by the patterns of the mind. Now, such a state, we cannot contemplate what it is, but according to Patanjali, it says, Virama pratyaya vyasa purva samskara sheshonyaha. There's another type of samadhi, unaffected by everything that happens in the mind. All the qualities of the mind, all the faculties of the mind is subordinate to that inner wisdom of the seer. Now, what that wisdom is like, we don't know. However, it's the very gravity that pulls us towards itself. And it's the very gravity of life that kind of wants to realize itself. Then Patanjali says that there's a subtlety in our mind that continues. Patanjali doesn't explicitly speak about reincarnation or anything like that, but he takes for granted that there's a subtle component, the essence, substance in our mind that continues to exist despite of the fact that our physical body is exhausted and it dies. And this inner subtle nature that constitute our, say, karmic nature or our personality, that continues to exist and it goes into a different form. And what Patanjali probably means with this, that whatever we get into contact with, whatever we do, whatever actions we do in life, leaves a certain residue on us. Like if you walk through a flower field, you'll smell some flowers. If you walk through a pig house, you smell a certain scent. But what he probably means by that is like whatever you get into contact with leaves a certain fragrance, and that fragrance lingers with you for a period of time and affects you. The inmost purity of the self is untouched by anything, but the subtle covering of the self, which is our mind and our very personality, that Patanjali argues continues. And in order for us to develop into yoga, our very starting point is Shraddha, it's faith. And like a mother that is always there to support us and comfort us as children when we are distressed, the same way Shraddha, faith, is our only reliable substance to continue our inquiry into yoga. You cannot know fully yoga in name and form. You can only feel it in your heart or from the clarity in your mind. But as you allow that to become deeper and more centered, it will start to have an effect on you. And what Patanjali says is Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, Purvaka, Itaresham. For other people who continues to exist in this world, and when they move on, what makes them stay and develop on the path of yoga is first and foremost faith. Faith is that kind of centering gravitational force that make you feel at one with things. We can doubt things to an eternity, but if there's a certain faith, we pull ourselves into action, we start doing something. And as that faith becomes stronger, there's also a kind of valor and strength and stability that becomes more centered in the mind. And then he says, then you will start to recall the purity and the essence of the mind. So Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi. He says, like, these are the four gradual stages of Sampragnata Samadhi. That first there is faith, then there is resilience and strength, then there's an increase of memory power and awareness, and then eventually the mind will be more centered. The path of progress in yoga is of course different according to the state of your mind and according to the very practice that you do. Patanjali says, Tivra samveganam asanaha. You may attain the goal very quickly, but it's depending on three things. First and foremost, the practice that you do, and then what kind of mind you have. If your mind is sharp and alert, or if it's a little dull, distracted, or confused, then it's harder to attain the state of yoga. Patanjali said, Tivra samveganam asanaha. The goal may be quickly attainable, but it's dependent. Murdu madhyadi matratva tatopi visheshaha. But it's dependent whether your practice is kind of mild, moderate, or intense, or whether your mind is kind of super alert, a little dull, or totally distracted. And according to this, the depth, the strength, the quality of your practice, and according to the state of your mind, this is how we make progress in yoga.